is open. If you have your tickets, you may enter.
Right on. Report the weather now. Well, we got a problem right there with 100,000 feet. Up in the stratosphere.
Yeah, there'll be a 50 badger too that went down to a cloud formation coming in. Then we're also coming.
That's him.
Yeah, I think I heard you say something about it. Well, then, picking up some change. All these wicked out there.
Is that them right at the top now?
Yeah, right at the top. They're going to wave their kids the wrong way.
For some reason, the top of this is blurry up there.
What is changing?
south end will be coming up this way. If you look to your left and across the field beyond the parked aircraft, if you're high enough to see beyond them, you'll see the Concorde starting to taxi now through the north end of the field. This will be beginning their flight to nowhere. About 100 folks who are willing to pay $1,250 in front of the Air Museum. The Great Gallery, there will be a travel person right there in front of the Great Gallery to take your money and reserve you a seat on the flight to nowhere for tomorrow. Those 4 giant Rolls-Royce turbofan engines with afterburners, 20-ton airplane, the supersonic transport.
You weren't in my way, thanks.
Centennial salute to aviation. As Como's Len Ramirez reports, Boeing Field was alive with the sound from a couple of supersonics, the real supersonics.
It was a high-speed supersonic trip to nowhere. The British Airways Concorde lifted off at Boeing Field with a cargo of curious air travelers. They paid $1,250 apiece for a trip across the sound barrier. In the meantime, there were plenty of thrills for those whose wallets kept them glued to the ground, especially during an incredible flyby from the B-1 bomber. There was also a special convoy of military jets. The procession would visit all 3 Wings Over Washington air shows in Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane. But the Concorde was really the star of this air show. After 2 hours of travel over the Pacific, its flight to nowhere ended with a perfect landing. Although most paid dearly for the trip, a few Washington students who won essay contests went along for free.
Oh, I lost my stomach, and then we just kind of really went fast. It kind of jerked you back a little bit.
You know, 57,000, you didn't feel nothing. You could set a glass there and it would not even move.
I'll tell him that it was fascinating and fast.
Well, for most, it was a once-in-a-lifetime flight, and let us tell you, there are tickets still available to fly on the Concorde, but again, it'll cost you $1,250.
No, it's not already down.
I think it's coming this direction, right?
over Washington, a Centennial celebration. Well, planning began years ago. Today, Stacy Sakamoto met the man whose love of flying made it possible for others to enjoy this weekend's shows.
You asked me about what I thought about that airplane. I kept thinking of a phrase that somebody said to me once. They said, "Words can't say what eyes silently scream."
Rolf Rautenberg loves planes. He's a marketing man and a former airline pilot. It's been his task, his baby, to put together Wings Over Washington, aviation salute to the state Centennial, a job tailor-made for someone like Rautenberg.
It was the Centennial Commission that said we want to have air shows all over the state in one day so that everybody can have a chance to go see one.
He's been working on the celebration for nearly 4 years, some of it without pay. He talks about the project with enthusiasm, the same enthusiasm he has for flying.
Well, it's been there since I was 6 years old, saying, "Mommy, I'm almost positive those are the engines of a DC-3. Had a very good ear. I could tell the difference between different engine sounds at an early age.
He enjoys seeing the same enthusiasm in others.
Fuel consumption, 15 gallons an hour.
I think Confucius said that an 11,000-mile journey started by putting one foot in front of the other. That's exactly what you do. You find the project or the theme of whatever is of interest to you in your life, and you go pursue it.
He's awfully secretive about his next project, but you can bet it'll involve airplanes. Stacy Sakamoto, Cairo News.
That's a safe bet. Final attendance figures aren't in yet, but it's estimated that
passengers are still boarding. There's 91 people on their way first to New York, and then the short leg. Actually, that's going to be the longer part of the trip, and then the short leg from New York to London. There are 91 passengers. They paid a fare of about $6,700 for the privilege of riding in this machine, and they're all pretty excited about it. It was due to take off about 15 minutes ago, and as you can see, people are still boarding, so I think we're a ways away, Susan, from this actually taking off.
Do you know, Barbara, how long it takes to fly from here to New York on the Concorde?
Well, the entire trip is going to take them about 9 hours, which is pretty typical for a regular jet from Seattle to London. So the leg, excuse me, from Seattle to New York is going to be a little long because they cannot fly at supersonic speeds, as you know, over the United States. So that's actually going to take them a little while. They have to fly at substandard speeds. It's less fuel efficient for the jet, but, you know, that's the way it is.
I see. So maybe a 5-hour trip. That's usually what it takes to fly to New York.
I believe so. You can see where we're at. The Concorde has just started to taxi down the runway here. It's going to be a few minutes before. It's going to take off out of the town, out of the city, and heading south. And so it's going to be a while before we actually see it airborne. But we're going to be here and take pictures, and hopefully, Susan, we're going to relay those to you.
Well, hopefully. We've been waiting all hour for this. Now, I understand we have Chopper 7 up in the air as well to get a good view, so we'll be sure to get back to that in just a moment.
The plane, I am told, once it turns the corner, and it has just done that, will take off, and we'll do that, as you can imagine, very quickly. It'll be airborne pretty quick. Here it comes. 91 passengers on board. They're on their way to New York, and then New York to London, and they'll be traveling twice the speed of light. You see a little smoke behind them. Here it comes. We're just going to savor the moment here. It's not often you get to see something like this.
These are live pictures now from Chopper 7. We are actually switching back and forth between our ground camera and our camera in the air. Spectacular shots of the Concorde taking off into the wild blue yonder.
And Susan, I don't know if you heard that loud roar, but it certainly deafened the crowd here. I'm not sure my hearing's ever going to be the same.
Barbara, from our point of view, it looked like it was a very gentle takeoff. It hardly looked like it was going fast enough to lift off, and yet it did so quickly. Was that just the camera's angle, or is it...
Well, it's partly the camera's angle. It's partly, I think, the design of this particular aircraft makes it look like, you know, it's gliding out.
Yeah, a little bit different from a fully loaded large 747.
Quite a sight.
Indeed it was. Thank you so much.
Folks in the Puget Sound area go gaga over all kinds of planes.
We do.
We got another one to go gaga.
Lucky passengers aboard bound for London. Concorde was here over the weekend for Wings Over Washington, a two-day air show celebrating aviation in this state. Saturday and Sunday, SST buffs could travel a third of the way to Hawaii on what was billed as a flight to nowhere. The flight consisted of an hour out over the Pacific, then an hour back to Boeing Field. In a Concorde, that gets you a third of the way to Hawaii, which isn't quite enough, right?
The Concorde was here for this weekend's Emerald City Flight Festival. It left Seattle with 91 passengers on board, most from the Puget Sound area. Now, after refueling in New York, the Concorde will travel twice the speed of sound all the way to London. Despite its reputation for speed, it will take the Concorde 9 hours to reach London. That's because it is not allowed to travel at supersonic speeds over the United States, or there'd be that sonic boom breaking all across the land.
Certainly would be. That's Carol.
His knowledge left wheel stuck in the up position. The pilot burned off his extra fuel. Then he tried to shake the plane, even banging it down on the runway, hoping that the landing gear would drop into place. But it didn't work, so he came back up and put it down. The jet slid down the runway on that left engine and on the right wheels, came to a stop. 107 people on board, among them.
Hello everybody, I'm Steve Poole and welcome to Wings Over Washington. In this year of our state's centennial, more and more people are recognizing the importance and tradition of aviation in our state. In the next half hour, we are going to take you flying in everything from a hot air balloon to this, the supersonic Concorde. There is a great fascination with aviation and we're going to explore that fascination, so let's get started. Wings Over Washington was a huge statewide day-long celebration of our state's aviation history. McChord Air Force Base in Tacoma, one of the sites for this year's celebration. Tonight, you'll join the thousands given a rare look inside military aviation. At Boeing Field, it's not just the Concorde drawing the crowds. We'll take you to 12,000 feet for a breathtaking experience. In eastern Washington, a unique look at older Soviet technology. But as you'll see tonight, it's the U.S. Air Force acrobatics that really steal the show. And in Kent, come along for a ride as we take you back in our state's aviation roots. And then travel to Dog Mountain, where daring flyers simply rely on the wind to keep them up in the air. This convoy of Washington-based aircraft touring the state during the Wings Over Washington celebration gives you an idea of our state's importance to national defense. Swooping over Spokane's Fairchild Air Force Base are F-15 fighters based at McCord. A-6s based at Whidbey Island Naval Air Station are designed to operate from aircraft carriers. Then there's the C-130 transport aircraft from McCord. They carry troops and tons of equipment. And the jet transports, the C-141s. They do the same kind of job, and they're also based at McCord. The flying gas station, the KC-135 refueling jet, based here at Fairchild. And finally, the big B-52 bombers, also from Fairchild. The military officially recognized our Centennial at McCord Air Force Base. Governor Booth Gardner unveiled a specially painted C-141. And all around the world, the plane will remind people of our aviation history here in Washington State, a history most associate with the name Boeing. This is the famous Red Barn. About 70 years ago, this is about all there was to the Boeing company. Of course, we know what a giant in the aerospace industry it is today. But when you look at the history of aviation in the Northwest, there is, of course, Boeing, but there's an awful lot more as well. The Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk in 1903 sparked worldwide interest in flying. But it was 7 years before the first plane landed on our state's soil. That flight ignited imaginations here, with a flood of people learning to fly and build their own aircraft. Vic Seeley is the curator of the Museum of Flight. The former Boeing engineer is considered a walking encyclopedia of aviation. Vic says that while Bill Boeing is famous for building airplanes, he was not the first one to do so in this state.
You could look at Tom Hamilton's earliest airplanes, Herb Munter's, all were a few years before Boeing.
In fact, it was in 1912 when 18-year-old Herb Munter built the first plane in Washington. But it was Bill Boeing Sr. who got the aviation industry off the ground here. His goal, to build a better airplane. In 1916, he introduced the B&W seaplane, named for Boeing and his partner, Conrad Westervelt. At first, Boeing apparently didn't think of airplane building as big business.
He looked at it possibly initially as a sport, but when the B&W was built, we were getting close to being involved with the Great War in Europe. So Boeing had the idea that he could possibly build airplanes for the war effort.
And that's just what he did. In 1917, Boeing received its first major contract, 50 training planes for the Navy. By World War II, those training planes evolved into aircraft like the B-17 Flying Fortress. The military was not alone in the air. The government was also using planes to fly the mail. But in 1926, the nation's airmail system was contracted to private airlines, including Walter Varney's. His Blue Swallow planes carried the mail from Pasco to Elko, Nevada, the so-called nowhere route. This happened around the time of another historic event in aviation, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight.
So with Lindbergh's trip across the Atlantic, people clamored to jump on board with the mail. And that suddenly increased the demand for more passenger seats for airplanes.
That gave birth to passenger service. The city of Auburn was one of the first passenger planes. This Boeing-built aircraft with its wooden interior carried 18 passengers and could complete a coast-to-coast flight in about 27 hours. At this time, the Boeing company was also part of United Airlines. But that all changed in 1934, when President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the breakup of United, and Boeing was back to just building airplanes. Bill Boeing Sr. was so upset, he sold his interest in the company he founded and never again returned to aviation. The appetite for flying fed the imaginations of many others in Washington and many home-built inventions, including the Aero Car. It was designed in 1947 by M.B. Taylor of Longview. In 10 minutes, you could convert it from a car to an airplane. However, the FAA refused to allow mass production, fearing the skies would become jammed with flying cars. You can see this replica, along with other aircraft, at the Museum of Flight, a showcase for Washington's aviation history. Now, don't you go taking off yet. Coming up, we'll take you diving from 12,000 feet and on a daring solo flight when Wings Over Washington returns. Washington. This is a Boeing B-47, one in a long line of military aircraft built by the Boeing Company. There's a long tradition of military aviation in this state. Nearly every branch of the service is represented here, and nearly every aircraft type that you can imagine. If you spend much time looking to the sky in Washington state, you've probably seen most of the weapons in the U.S. aviation arsenal. But adding to the excitement at the Fairchild celebration was an unfamiliar visitor to our skies. The Korean War was the last time most Americans saw this aircraft, a Soviet MiG-15. Developed in 1947, a California company recently bought this MiG from the Chinese, who were using it for training. Test pilot Tom Archer learned to fly it by reading flight manuals translated from Chinese.
This is a standard Soviet cockpit. This airplane was actually built in China, so you'll see some Chinese lettering, but it's Soviet-made equipment, most of it. Sometimes I look at these scrawny little wings out here, and I know all the laws of aerodynamics, but I say, what's really holding me up? Well, I picture the hands of God, holding me, keeping the airplane up in the air. But because it's, even though you understand what makes an airplane fly, you get in it, an airplane or helicopter, glide or anything, and it's hard to believe that it's really suspended in air like that.
If experienced pilots still find it hard to believe, where does that leave the rest of us? During Wings Over Washington, visitors could vicariously experience the thrill. At McCord Air Force Base, getting a picture taken in the cockpit of an F-15 sent fantasies flying.
You ready?
Ready.
Good smile. Perfect.
Well, if I were a kid, this is where I would be.
Yep.
It is just beautiful.
It's got several flight control computers and redundant backups to
Ian
those.
Milne knows the thrill of flight firsthand. He grew up in Bellevue and flies an F-16. His uncle, who worked for Boeing, got him interested in flying, but Hollywood added a dimension he'd never expected.
Nobody really even thought much about our flight suits or what we did for a living until Top Gun, really. And then now I walk down the street in my flight suit and people wonder if I know Tom Cruise. I don't know Tom Cruise, but he's not a fighter pilot either.
But now pilots are not the only ones who know the freedom of flight. At Boeing Field, the Army's Golden Knights showed how you can fly with a parachute.
Okay, ready, let's go!
Jumping from a height of 2.5 miles, the gravity pulls them to speeds in excess of 150 miles per hour. At 2,000 feet, the chutes are open. It's a thrilling demonstration of man taming gravity. Another thrill few people ever get to see happens at 22,000 feet aboard a KC-135. This refueling jet demonstrates its mission in the skies over Crater Lake. It's a practice flight designed to fine-tune the skills of the Thunderbird pilots. One by one, the F-16 fighters rotate in for fueling. 1,000 gallons of fuel are pumped in a matter of minutes. Major Jeff Remington, in number 5, says flying formation with a tanker is similar to flying their aerial routines.
You just look at that other airplane. We don't look at any instrumentation or anything else. Your hand's on the throttle, the other hand's on the stick, and you look at that airplane to make it work. That's just good.
The Thunderbirds represent the military at their best: tradition, pride, and patriotism. It's an especially proud moment for one particular man at the Fairchild performance. Ed Remington flew 39 bombing missions in World War II. He's Thunderbird pilot Jeff Remington's father.
I used to fly boxcars, you know. I mean, he's flying something that's really worthwhile flying. This kid is just something else.
Kind of like to trade places?
Oh, I'd love to. I was born 30 years too soon.
Right now, I am underneath the Concorde. Those are the big Rolls-Royce engines that power this airplane at 1,400 miles per hour. That's 2 times the speed of sound. We're going to show you what that's like in just a couple of minutes. But first, you know, you don't have to have afterburners in order to enjoy flying. No, every day there are ordinary people who are getting into the skies in a more leisurely fashion. It's